today is get smart on how to use energy contracting to your school's advantage. And I'm joined today by Dr. Timothy Unruh, Executive Director at National Association of Energy Service Companies.
Great to be here today, Portia, and I'm eager to talk with you about this great subject of energy savings performance contracts and how it can help the nation.
Maybe let's get started first off just with the basics. Can you tell me what is an energy service company and what they can do for a school district?
Well, an energy service company, we affectionately call them ESCOs because we all love our acronyms. An energy service company, well, they're really a group of people who have developed an expertise in renovating existing buildings with the purpose of reducing the operational costs. And those operational costs include energy costs, they include labor costs, they include subcontractor costs, and they've developed a talent of doing that. Plus, that energy service company has the requirement of living with the project for often 2 decades, 20 years potentially, where they have to ensure that the equipment works, that it works properly, and that it works efficiently. And they'll go so far as to install measurement equipment to measure the performance and evaluate it on a yearly basis to ensure that what they thought was going to happen is what happens. In other words, they try to do what they say they're going to do. And then why for schools and why these companies would be appropriate for schools is schools, as we saw in a GAO report that came out last year, have a significant need for improvements to their buildings. I think over half in the study of school buildings needed some sort of a systematic replacement in their buildings. And I think 40% or more indicated that they needed heating, ventilating, air conditioning, or HVAC type of improvements. So there's a great need in schools. And why the match is there is that an energy service company works to find ways that the savings that you can find in a building by replacing old decrepit equipment, improving the operations, would be used to fund that replacement. So in other words, if I save $100, that $100 comes back to me each year. And because I'm doing a financed type of arrangement, that $100 is often multiplied by 10, and that $100 of annual savings can provide $1,000 of building improvements. So what we see is those buildings can be improved quite substantially.
I think this is such a really important topic, especially as we hear in the news about so many schools are quite old and there's a big opportunity to upgrade. And we'll get to that in just a moment. I want to ask you a little bit about performance contracting and why you think it's appealing to schools, especially maybe right now.
Well, that's also a good question. Performance contracting, they're called energy savings performance contracts. And there's a lot of banter around terminology these days. Some people like to throw out what they call P3s, or public-private partnerships. And performance contracts have been around for over 40 years. And we think that they're really probably the original P3 type contract. And performance contracts are really beneficial to schools because schools have a significant need in funding. They're really short of funds. They don't have the money coming from their local communities to do these retrofits because the money's just not there. They can do bond issues and they can do different things to raise money, but even then, it's not enough to do everything they need to do. And so why a performance contract is valuable is it can do a standalone project with just the energy savings, and it can renovate a building and improve the building's heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems. It can improve the lighting. And what that means is it makes a better environment for students to learn. But even better is some school districts can raise money and can get money from their constituents. And if you combine that with a performance contract, then you have the best of both worlds. You get an improvement because of investment made by the community, but then you bolster that investment by leveraging it and getting more with the performance contract, bringing in the savings of the whole project to fund even more. And in those cases, you can do significant improvements to the schools by replacing windows. You can get roofs done. You can install renewable energy and try to reduce the greenhouse gas and the footprint of the schools. There's a substantial amount you can do. And there's a great need today to make sure these schools are operating because of all the pandemic issues. And energy service companies have been doing indoor renovations like this for years. And they know how to make the environment better. Back in the 1970s, when efficiency started, It was make things cold when you wanted to be warm, make things warm when you wanted to be cold. It was drive slow, and it was turn off the lights or dim the lights. And it was basically a system where we made ourselves uncomfortable, and it was an austerity approach. Fast forward to today, and energy efficiency is a technological innovation. When we renovate the lights in a building, we expect the lighting to be better quality, not worse quality. When we renovate the heating, ventilated air conditioning system, we expect it to have better indoor air quality, not worse. And so all of a sudden, efficiency no longer means austerity. It means productivity. It means a better learning environment. It means a lack of COVID issues because you've addressed these heating, ventilation, air conditioning. You've got ventilation. You've got lighting. We can install UVC lighting to sanitize. We can install better systems to filter the air. We can go in and improve the overall building in so many ways with performance contracting through efficiency that's why schools need this, because there's a great need. And then you also think about the resiliency needs. So there's even one more area, is when you get to resiliency needs, you've got the issue where the schools want to be resilient, meaning that they're providing a community center in some way to help the community to survive situations that they weren't expecting. That may mean through having an inoculation site. That could mean by having a shelter-in-place site. And so you've got to have the versatility of buildings, and ESCOs have the ability to provide that functionality.
I think that's so important, Tim, because I think what you're really getting at is just how important that school building is to communities. And so everything that you're talking about makes sense that we'd want to make those investments. And I want to pull on this thread a little bit in terms of what lessons learned has NAESCO captured with regards to ESPC in the education market?
Well, performance contracting has really done a significant learning curve since it was started 40 years ago. You might say 40 years ago, we were kind of in the Wild West, where we understood how things worked and we had a pretty good idea, but a lot of people kind of took things into their own hands to try to implement things. Move that to today, just like the technology has got a great improvement, so have the policy, the procedures, and the tools. And we've really done a great job of creating a standard set of contracts. For example, the U.S. Department of Energy has a set of contracts that each state can adopt. And then the state guidelines usually depict of how the schools interact with the energy service company. That's great, created a great standardization. They also maintain a database with over 7,000 projects. And that provides us with an understanding of how these projects work, the type of savings that we get from the projects, as well as a database we can go back and look to see trends over time. And so that's been a great tool. On the other side, we have things like owners representatives that's developed. There are members of my organization that provide what's called owners representation. In K-12 schools, you come in and do a project like this, they may not necessarily have the on-site knowledge to understand all the aspects of a renovation like this. So there's a market called the owner's rep that will come in and provide that third-party assistance that's not related to the energy service company, but yet supports the owner with technical assistance and guidance to help go forward. And so there's a lot of things that put an energy service company and a performance contract in place to provide sound, solid service. And the final thing that we've done is NAESCO has an accreditation. It's called an Energy Service Company Accreditation. We have a lot of big companies. Trane is one of those companies that provides that accreditation, that has accomplished that accreditation. And what that means is that those accredited companies have gone through a thorough evaluation of their past performance, how well they interact with their client, how they build their job, how they ensure that the savings is achieved. And we review them and then qualify them for up to a 3-year period. And then they have to requalify every 3 years for that accreditation. So those things all together create an environment where a school has the confidence that this type of project and contract will work and it will be successful.
So, Tim, that really resonates. And it sounds like in the combination of the expertise, the experience, the standardization that you have around the different kinds of jobs that you can do for a school district would give school boards, superintendents a lot of confidence in working with NAESCO. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the kinds of risks, because that makes me then think about risk. And it sounds like a lot of what you do is really help school districts avoid some risks if they were to kind of freelance it, right? Try to do it on their own. But I wonder if you can talk about what are the kinds of risks that are associated with the school project.
Well, there are risks. Obviously, you do a project like this, it has inherent risk just because it's a construction project.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you do a construction project, it has risks. It's further compounded with the fact that you're doing a renovation of an existing building. Now, schools have been around a long time. Now, in some communities, the buildings are fairly recent and there's a good history of all what's happened to them, but that's not common. In most areas, we don't know a lot about what's been done to the school. And so when you begin to open up walls and take things down that have been there for sometimes 30, 40, even 50 years, I've seen
Mm-hmm.
projects replace equipment. You don't know what's behind there. It might not have had the sunlight strike it for 50 years. And when you open it up, what you thought was there might not be there because the drawings aren't correct. They have not been updated and no one's been back there for so long. And so there's a huge risk in that, but that's always when you're doing a renovation of the existing facility. So those types of things are really construction related issues. Risks also that you have in a project like this is that the use of the facility could change. So for example, if you have a gymnasium, you could expect to have a certain use of that gymnasium and plan for an energy consumption pattern of a certain way. The use could change. I had one project a long time ago where they did a hot yoga class in the gymnasium and they had a spike in energy consumption. Well, what's interesting about it, while that turned out to be an increase in energy use, it was one that the school planned on and knew about and expected to pay for. But what's interesting is that because of the involvement of the energy service company, they hadn't realized the energy impact and the costs associated with that when they set up their fees for the class. And so that really helped them with the energy service company. And so that risk was mitigated by the fact of checking on the energy use. And so there's a lot of interesting things like that. You always have a risk of equipment failing. That's why we have warranties in place. You have risks of making sure that the staff knows how to operate and maintain the equipment. And so a performance contract provides training and ongoing support to ensure that that happens. So there are risks. And when you do a contract, sometimes they'll establish and talk about these risks like a risk responsibility matrix. And we'll talk about what could happen, who's responsible, and how we mitigate it. And so you always have the risk of non-performance. Perhaps the savings doesn't materialize in sufficient ways to pay the note. That's why the projects are guaranteed by the energy service company. If that occurs, the energy service company is obligated to make up the difference. So we try to protect the school district in as many ways as possible through the contract, through the service, and through the expertise, but mostly through the experience of having done this for so many years with so many qualified people.
I see. So we've talked about ESCOs and why a school district should engage in ESCO. We've talked about risk mitigation. Can you talk a little bit about who gets involved in these projects?
Well, that's a great question, Portia. When these projects are begun, we often think of them as a technical challenge. I'm an engineer. I've got this PhD in electrical engineering, and so I want to think everything is technical because that's the type of hammer I've got, and it works well for me. But the reality is that these projects, I think of them having four key elements. Technical is just one of them. Another element that you have to deal with is financial. And so when you think about the financial aspects, you've got to have people from the school district that represent the finance. That's often like a chief business officer. That could be principals. It's people that are in charge of where the money goes and understanding how that works. And then you've also got kind of an organizational challenge to overcome. And so you got to have people from the organization, and that's back to the principal. That might be someone from a school district level coming in and providing assistance, because the organization plays a role in that they set the policies, they set the procedures. You've got to have the organization there to make sure that you're satisfying the requirements of the legal necessary pieces, but also just are we meeting the needs of this building and what they think they're going to use it for in the future and how long it's going to last and so forth. And then finally, you've got the people. And those are the people who live and work and exist in the building, whether it's students, teachers, whether it's administrators, whether it's people that come in for a part-time basis. All those people matter as well. And so Those are the four pillars that you've got to address. Interestingly enough, the technical one is the simplest and easiest one to address.
I can totally believe it.
Yeah, we can do that day in and day out. Engineers know how to solve these problems. There's tables you can look it up, and there's all kinds of people that know how to do this. The financial one is probably, in my mind, the second easiest one to solve. So the two that people focus on the most are probably the easier ones to solve. Finances is we know how to acquire money. We know how to get a bond. We know how to get a loan. We know how to do those things. Those are pretty straightforward. But then you get to the organizational thing, and that can be tricky because you've got some people who think that rules should be followed this way and some things should be followed that way. And as an ESCO and the school member wanting to get this done, you've got to kind of come to a common pathway that you believe this is what my rules allow and this is what we can do. Whether it's the type of measures you can install, whether it's how long the payback's going to be, it's all those types of things come together in the organization that you have to work out, and just making sure that those are all there. But then the people. And the people represent everybody. So all the people involved in those other three areas are all those people that are at the end as well. And so you have an interesting case with these types of projects is that people get opinions about them. And they may decide, I don't like this project, or I do like this project, or, if we can't get X in the project, I don't know that I can support it. And so you have all types of opinions come out, and you have to manage all those and finally get everyone to an agreement. It's almost like going to Congress and trying to get bills passed. You've got to get all these people to kind of agree, and that means you have to have concessions for some. Some people can't get everything they want, and some people have to compromise to make finally an agreement at the end. But if you don't have all those met, when you get down to that day you want to sign the contract, you're going to have a hiccup. You've got to address all four of those.
I think what strikes me is having seen school construction projects in my own community, I now understand, Tim, why it takes so long for them to get off the ground. We have a brand new middle school in my community. Took 4 years to get built, and I'm understanding now. And then we're retrofitting another school, and that's taking about 2 years.
Well, we all recognize that doing work when we have to work in a committee, it's a little harder and it takes longer. And now imagine that committee being as big as a whole school building full of people, and then maybe even a whole community of people.
Democracy is hard and messy.
Yes, that's right.
Can you talk about the kinds of protections that are in place? So when a school district engages in NAESCO, what kinds of protections are in place to ensure that the project actually goes as planned?
Well, we've kind of addressed some of this earlier in comments about having some of the standard processes and procedures in place. So each state has some methodology that they've developed on how they want performance contracts to work in their state. So every state, all 50 states across the country, have legislation that enables this to work. In most states, there is an organization like the State Energy Office in many cases, and they will have interpretations of that legislation on how they think the policies and procedures work. There'll be a standard set of contractual documents so that a school district doesn't have to draft their own from scratch. And so they'll use those as a standard methodology going to market. And then there is the contract itself that provides a guarantee to protect the owner in case of shortfall. So when you talk about protections, there's a lot of those things in place that provide that protections. But I think in many cases, I think that the best protection is the procurement process itself. A school district will go through a process of selecting an energy service company to work with. Nearly all of those processes involve an oral interview. And I know people will discount the oral interview as just one last hurdle to go forward. But when you do a performance contract, in many ways, it's kind of a very personal engagement with the energy service company and the site staff, meaning that there needs to be a lot of discussion recognizing that the project will be intrusive upon the building. Most school projects we try to do in the summer so that students aren't there, but it's not always possible to do everything in the summer when the schools are absent. So when the students are absent, so you do have some interaction that could occur, and all these things, changing a person's workspace, having contracts in there becomes a personal issue. And so it's important through the oral interview that becomes one of your protective pieces. You want to understand the personalities of the people that you're dealing with, and are they going to mesh with the personalities that you believe you have on staff? And you can tell that. Does the energy service company correct each other? That's kind of a sign of problem. Does the energy service company cut off the staff when they're talking? So that talking interaction provides a lot of information about how an energy service company is going to work with you. And I believe that that's one of the key protections that a school district always should make sure to exercise is do that oral interview. Pick the company that you feel comfortable with. Sure, there's pricing components and all that. That's the standard procurement process. But don't discount that non-quantitative interaction that you have with the ESCO. I believe that provides a lot of protection. So those are the types of protections I see, from policy to contracts to the guarantee, and then finally the procurement process itself.
So I want to talk about the flip side of that, because we've talked about why engage in ESCO. We've talked about risk mitigation, the important stakeholders involved in ensuring project goes smoothly. Talk about when projects go wrong. And I'm curious if there are some common denominators that you've seen across multiple projects that might help others who are in the early stages think about in terms of avoiding.
Sure. It's inevitable that a project will go wrong, that there's going to be something wrong with it. And with the industry, it's key that we recognize that there are cases like that, and how our industry, energy service companies, respond to projects that go wrong is really what can make the industry or break the industry. And so when a project goes wrong, I think of some things that can happen. Is you might have something was installed and it does not work like it should. I've had that. I've worked for an ESCO. I've installed something that was a little bit more cutting edge than probably we should have considered, and it did not work as well as what we thought. And we had to go back in and replace that system with something that did work. And so that's the correct response, and that's what the energy service company should do. If it just doesn't perform like it's supposed to, that would be the case. The second case you have, I think, where something could go wrong is you could have the savings not being materialized in a way that was expected. Now, there's a lot of reasons that could happen. I talked about one where a school changed its use of a facility that caused an energy increase. And those are often the easiest. There could be that the equipment is not performing in the way that was anticipated, and there might need to be some adjustments, retuning, or a change of the sequence of operation of how systems work. There could be cases where things aren't performing right. An easy example to understand is perhaps the lighting sensors that detect occupancy aren't working right, and people are getting lights turned off with them when they don't want the lights turned off. That's an adjustment that a contractor needs to come back out and do, and that's a common practice. Another way things could go wrong is there could just be overall misunderstanding of how the equipment should be operated by the staff. And so in those cases, it might be that you have to have retraining and understand how that works. I guess my point is that in this industry, one of the key things is in that procurement process is a project reference. And every ESCO wants to bring a project reference to that procurement process from prior projects. If they don't take care of their prior customers, they come out in the reference process. And when they come out in the reference process, then they're not going to get selected for another project. So it's very key that ESCOs know they have to maintain their past projects. What's interesting is back to that accreditation process, one of the reasons you want to pick an accredited ESCO is because in our accreditation process, we don't allow them to cherry pick the projects and just send us the good ones. They have to send us all the projects done through a period of time. And by sending us all the projects, we're able to discern if there's bad projects in there that they did not maintain properly. And so choosing an accredited ESCO is really one of the key things that can help you avoid some of those pitfalls.
I appreciate that, Tim. And I want to change the directions just a little bit, because we've been talking about what it takes to, why hire an ESCO, risk, the kinds of individuals to get involved in. There's certainly been a lot of conversation now around the stimulus funds that are available now for schools. Some might say it's a generational, sort of once in a generation opportunity to improve school infrastructure. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that opportunity is for improving infrastructure with COVID relief aid that's available right now for school districts.
Sure. Well, so that's interesting is we have had an incredible amount of relief money passed by the federal government that's being passed down to state and local communities for
Yes.
spending. The biggest one to impact schools is called the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER funds for the acronym again, because we love our acronyms. And the ESSER funds were passed as part of three bills, one in March of 2020, one in December of 2020, and one in March of 2021. In those second two bills, Congress specifically said one of the things you can use ESSER funds for is building improvement to improve the ventilation and air quality inside schools to address COVID issues. And so there's the opportunity right there. The amount of funds that was passed was somewhere around $175 billion. I did some little working with the numbers to see how school districts have spent money in the past. And my estimate is that about $25 billion of that will go towards facility improvement. And so if $25 billion is going toward facility improvement, what we have to recognize first and foremost is that's a lot of money. But ironically, it's nowhere near the money that they need. And so while it's a lot of money, it's not enough money. And so a school district must think about how they can use the ESSER funds in conjunction with other ways to improve their buildings. I believe that energy savings performance contracts provide that avenue. One of the challenges with the ESSER funds is the money came out with something called uniform guidance. That is the standard way that grants are distributed by Department of Education out to school districts. That uniform guidance is unclear on how performance contracts can fit within it. And we have actually communication from Department of Education that they tell us they see that performance contracts can fit into the uniform guidance easily. But as you can imagine, each state is interpreting that guidance in their own way. And in some cases, it's very favorable, and in some cases, it's not favorable to performance contracts. And why that's important is because if you have $25 billion to spend, we think you can leverage that and probably get 4 times that leverage to get $100 billion plus the 25 to get $125 billion by taking the 25 and leveraging it with a performance contract. There are several ways you can work through that and more details than what we want to cover in this type of talk, but there are options to include those together, and a school district should really strive to work with their state education agency, with a local education agency together to see how those can be combined, because if you don't combine those with some other savings-based type performance contracting, you've missed $100 billion of money that could improve your schools. And that's going to vary on each community on how that works, but that's really the kind of the summary of that. In addition, back in March, there was also passed what's called the Fiscal Relief Funds. The Fiscal Relief Funds is money that was $350 billion that goes out across all of the local government entities across the country. Governors have a large say in how that money is spent. I know in my own state of Virginia, our governor has said that $250 million of that money is going to be taken out and put into K through 12 schools. And he's asking that they'll come in and match it with $250 million from their ESSER funds to make that work. So they're getting $500 million of work towards school buildings by combining the two funds. I don't know what other states are doing, but if you're talking to people, you should encourage them that they should start diverting some of that money back into K through 12 schools.
So, Tim, is NAESCO advising? What is NAESCO's role in this? Is NAESCO advising states on how to best use these allocations, or are you where can if people wanted to really understand where the allocations were happening on a state by state level, any recommendations on where to best look and resources for understanding how to best allocate those funds?
Well, if you just do a Google search for ESSER funds, Department of Education, you'll find the site where the ESSER funds are described and all the information provided by education is there. There are some places you can find the distribution amount to states, but I think generally you'll need to go to the state to find the distribution to individual school districts. And then there's for the other fund, the Fiscal Relief Funds, that is Department of Treasury, and they also have a very comprehensive website with information there. NAESCO's role is to engage in certain areas where we see there's additional help needed. So we don't have the resources to go try to address 50 state governments plus several territories and make that happen. We try to look at things where we can have the most impact. So we look at federal advocacy. We've been advocating for an additional spending package that would be part of the reconciliation package called the Open Back Better Act. In that act, we're asking that $20 billion be distributed out to state and local governments, including K-12 schools, that would enable performance contracting to be mixed with that and leverage that up to $120 billion. And so that is pending legislation, and who knows where that's at up in Congress. We'll have to wait and see how that all pans out. But when you look at the opportunities, NAESCO tries to focus on where its members have called us in for assistance. So maybe we'll get a call to come into Illinois, and we'll form a coalition and go work in Illinois, maybe North Carolina, maybe California, but we don't have the ability to hit all 50 states. We try to hit where our members are seeing particular challenges we think we can address.
So I want to talk a little bit about renewable power, certainly something we're talking a lot about. I know you spent some time at the Department of Energy where you were involved with renewable power research and grid modernization. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see these technologies fitting in with school infrastructure?
Well, the team that I led back at Department of Energy, the renewable power, from solar, wind, geothermal, and hydro, I was so impressed with their ability to understand the markets, to develop the research, and to manage the research contracts that we're going through. And so, they're making great strides in researching new technologies and getting those out to market. They have programs to help try to train people on understanding how to fix and repair these pieces of equipment and so forth. And so they're doing a fantastic job. When it comes down to project implementation, we're looking at trying to take products that are on the market and install them in facilities. And I will tell you that my members are telling me that nearly every project that they do has some form of renewable energy in it. Most of the time it's solar, but they're telling me just about every project has renewable energy and some type of battery storage is being put in as well. So there's clearly a strong desire from the customer side to put that in, and that includes K-12 schools. I think with the research and development that's done back at Department of Energy to reduce the cost of these measures, we really see that in many cases, this solar is now cost effective, where 10 years ago, it did not fit into a project and it became something more of a drag on the project. Today, it can actually help carry the project. And I think where these are important to consider, the renewable energy aspect is as we think about greenhouse gas reduction, the challenge that we have is it leads us to a future where we have to think of electrification. It means that we can't really just think of business as usual and keep reinstalling fossil fuel equipment that's still going to be in there for 30 years. I mean, you replace a boiler today and you've locked in potential fossil fuel emissions from that boiler if you choose a fossil fuel for 30 years. We see the boilers last forever. And so we have to think about that as a different avenue. And electrification becomes kind of the only way that we can do that. Now, some would say, well, but if we electrify, the electric grid is emitting carbon, and so we're just shifting it from our local side to the electric grid. That may be the case, but the electric grid is gradually moving toward a decarbonized state, and we have to start focusing in one place to get that done. Whether that's electric vehicle supply infrastructure, or whether that is shifting to electric heat in places in our buildings, that's one of the considerations we have as we think about greenhouse gas and emissions reductions. We have to think about how do we do that. Energy service companies are well versed with that. Clearly, each community has their own decisions to make. In some communities, electrification just is not going to be an option that they can consider. And certainly we can go back in with the fossil fuel replacements as necessary. So I think that's one of the joys of working with an energy service company is they don't come in a bid plan spec approach where it just says this is the way you have to bid the project. They come in and want to work cooperatively with the energy service company and the client. They work together to figure out what's the best solution for this particular locality, whatever that might be.
So, Tim, you've laid out a really compelling business case for why renewable power is actually so attractive. And it sounds like, from the perspective of the school district, especially given some of the financial savings, that there's a huge incentive, in the up front. And I'm wondering if you're seeing more demand because of this business case you've laid out. Are you seeing more communities demanding that schools consider using renewable energy sources when renovating, building new schools? Is this something that's even on the radar of communities, or is this still too far removed from the average person to be top of mind?
Well, as in everything, I'll give you a yes and no. Um, there are cases where that is occurring, and there are cases where that is not occurring. And I think what's important to recognize is when I was back at Department of Energy, what I saw was that local governments, states, cities, counties, school districts, universities, all seem to have a strong desire to move toward a more efficient, more renewable future. And whether that was mandated by some controlling entity or whether that was just a self-internal drive, it didn't really matter. We saw progress across the board happening with all these projects having more efficiency and more renewable included. So I think while the answer is yes and no, whether they're getting directed to do that, I think the reality is we see that there's a compelling desire to do that. I can tell you any institution that deals with students, whether that's a university or K-12 schools, those students want a renewable future. They want to see the green and environmentally friendly and the efficiency things put in, and they're excited about those things. And so that means that those people running those institutions can't help but also be excited about them and want those installed.
Tim, I think that is so true. And I can tell you, in the retrofit of my child's own school, they actually involved the kids as part of their science and engineering project to learn about some of the work that was happening. And the kids get very fired up by learning that the school will be much more energy efficient. And so I agree, our young people in some ways are pushing the adults to for some of the changes. I'm curious, I hope I'm not going to get you in trouble here with this question, but are there model communities or model schools that are out there that have done this really well, or that you can talk about? Or if you don't want to mention a specific name, maybe the profile of a school or school district that has done this particularly well in terms of why they've made it work. Your choice, name it specifically, or maybe give a profile of this of a couple of different school districts that have done this well.
Well, I'm not going to name any specific projects or school districts. It seems as that whoever I named, someone thought they should be named. So I won't name anybody.
I didn't want to get you in trouble.
I'll direct you over to our website where we have many case studies that show various projects. We have school districts that have accomplished net zero installations. We have some that have done great jobs where they've maybe reclaimed landfill gas. We have some that have installed some very impressive renewable systems. So there's a whole array of school districts who've done some really, really innovative things in their community. And you know what's interesting? When you get those students in the school and they see the school doing these renewable things, the students go back home and then they tell their mom and dad, hey, we're doing this at school. Can we do stuff like this at home too? And so it's really interesting the magnification that has, where the students just get excited about it and then bring it back home again.
Tim, my son has been asking for solar panels on our house, so I completely agree with that. And we've already gotten a couple of estimates, so we'll see where we land.
Good for you.
Tim, so appreciative of your time today. And I'm wondering if you have any parting thoughts or advice for an administrator who may be listening to this and perhaps thinking about starting their own project. What parting advice would you have for them?
Well, I think that there are resources available to help in the understanding. First and foremost, if you don't know what a performance contracting is, I recommend that you go out to the Department of Energy website and just search for ESPC on Department of Energy's website. There's a vast set of resources for federal buildings, but there's also a vast set of resources for state and local governments, including K-12 schools. If you still aren't quite certain, I would suggest the second level is to contact an energy service company that probably is either on your state's approval list, or if your state doesn't have an approval list, you can go to the NAESCO website. You can see our member list, or you can go to our accredited members list and call one of them and just ask them to help you understand the process. You don't have to do a procurement with them. You don't have to commit to that energy service company. Any of them will send someone out, have a phone call with you. In some cases, they'll even do a preliminary assessment to help you understand what the potential is, and all that's before you make any commitment to anybody. And so there's a lot of opportunity to learn there. In addition, if you're a school district, you can reach out to your state energy office. NAESCO does a lot of work with the National Association of State Energy Officials, and those are some top-notch people that run those state energy offices. They're involved in all these aspects, and they also can help you if you're looking for someone to provide that assistance. So there's a lot of places you can turn for that and get some assistance. And if none of those satisfy you, go to the NAESCO website and call the phone number there, and you can talk to me.
Wonderful. Well, we will also make sure to link to some of those resources in the show notes as well, so that listeners can write those down and access those online. Dr. Tim Unruh, Executive Director of NAESCO, thank you so much today for an engaging and informative conversation today. We really appreciate having you here.
Oh, thanks for having me here. I just love talking about these types of projects. I really think that they can transform buildings incredibly. So thank you very much.